A Link to the Past, A Historical Perspective by Emily Baker. For this historical perspective, we are going to dive into the history behind evolution and heredity, more specifically genes, in relation to discoveries found today. The article we will be referencing is Genes for Face Identified. Genes that determine the shape of a person's facial profile have been discovered by a UCL-led research team. In order to understand the importance of this, we will have to step into the past. When we define evolution, we look at the development and diversity seen within a species over time. Most of the time, this can take thousands of years to see the changes, but lucky for us, we have fossils that we can look at to compare and examine how species change over time. There have been many influences in regard to the discovery and theory of evolution. For this historical perspective, we are going to focus on Darwin's influence of evolution through natural selection. In The Origin, Darwin listed use and disuse among the sources of variation for selection. He said, "From the facts alluded to in the first chapter, I think there can be little doubt that use in our domestic animals strengthens and enlarges certain parts, and disuse diminishes them, and that such modifications can be inherited." Natural selection speaks only of adaptation to local environments, not of directed trends or inherent improvement. Natural selection would exert, as it were, an external pull, drawing most organisms to greater levels of complexity and perfection. The magnetic attraction to perfection would be, Darwin thought, induced by the peculiar dynamic of selection. He supposed that the environment against which organisms were most often selected would be the living environment of those creatures, so that reciprocal development responses would be evoked in a particular location and would lead to some more advanced creatures becoming simplified to backfill the gap. This would mean that some animal series might show a kind of de-evolution, but the trend would nonetheless be toward ever-increasing complexity. Darwin expressed his belief in progressive natural selection dynamic in his fourth transmutation notebook sometime in January of 1839. While Darwin's theory convinced many scientists that evolution happened and that species changed over time, many in the decades after Darwin did not accept natural selection as the cause of this organismal change. Darwin, however, opened the door to our next topic, heredity. Heredity is those physical and genetic traits that are passed within chromosomes to the offspring from parent sex cells. Remember that these traits are housed within our genes, those action-packed units that determine traits. In contemporary biology, heredity refers to the transmission of genetic information from generation to generation. Yet until the mid-18th century, the term heredity was absent from theoretical writings on the generation and propagation of living beings. Heredity was initially only a concern when it came to animal breeders, whose goal was to reproduce stronger and better species. However, Mendel started his experiment with his lovely peas, which became the building block for heredity. Mendel's pea experiment was the basis for particulate inheritance. However, his work was lost for some time, but when more experimental science emerged in regards to heredity, his observations and understandings of inheritance played a major role in our modern view of heredity today, and the role of genetics. In 1909, Wilhelm John Hansen coined the term gene to describe a unit of hereditary information. Theodore Bouvier and Walter Sutton were the two scientists that proposed that chromosomes bear the material of heredity. Now, one that may be most famous, in fact, is Thomas Morgan Hunt. The acceptance made by Morgan in 1910 regarding chromosomes as the carrier of heritable traits has been noted as one of the most important scientific discoveries of the 20th century. The discovery, however, was first noted 30 years prior to Morgan writing Drosophila in Mendel's work. Throughout the 1800s and into the 1900s, the acceptance of blended inheritance as a means of heritable traits moving through generations was the only theory widely spoken about among American scientists. Most naturalists of this time believed that reproduction was a conservative process intended by nature to keep the species true to its type. Darwin tried to create a theory that linked inheritance and blended traits through pangenesis. However, this was not agreed upon. Mendel also theorized the passing of traits within generations, but did not speak upon the variations found within generations. As new theories arose, they were continually met by skepticism. It wasn't until 1912 that Morgan accepted the data he saw in front of himself and the empirical data of chromosome theory. 30 years is a long time to argue theory, but having been in a day and age where microscopy was limited in what could be seen through embryology was a new theory that lacked data. Being willing to experiment rather than just theorize is what led to Morgan's acceptance. Even when Wilson was creating a theory and experiments that worked with insects across the hall, Morgan still didn't agree to the theory of particulate inheritance. When looking at a new theory, it was hard to go against the norm and the accepted theory of that time. Lacking sufficient evidence to contradict blended inheritance led to the linking acceptance it took for Morgan to see the truth within chromosome theory. Now let's discuss that article, Genes for Face Identified. A group of researchers and over 6,000 volunteers worked together to map out genes found within humans today. The team mapped out 32 genes that are related with modern human facial structures, such as the nose, lip, jaw, and brow shape. What was extremely interesting about this is that one of the genes appears to be inherited from the Denisovans, an extinct group of ancient humans who lived tens of thousands of years ago. These ancient humans were located in Central Asia, and there have been other studies suggesting that they interbred with modern humans that we see today. Some of this DNA even lives on today in Pacific Islanders and in the indigenous people of Americas. Listen to this from one of the researchers, co-corresponding author, Dr. Kastubu Adhikari. He said, "The face shape genes we found may have been the product of evolution, as ancient humans evolved to adapt to their environment. Possibly, the version of the gene determining lip shape that was present in the Denisovans could have helped in body fat distribution to make them better suited for cold climates of Central Asia, and was passed on to modern humans when the two groups met and interbred." This research has only been available in the last 2 decades and is crucial in understanding the development of heredity that we see today. Understanding the evolution of this could help in understanding of the developmental processes within gene regulation that determine facial features. This research helps understand genetic disorders that can be leading to many facial abnormalities. How awesome is that we were able to map out the framework for the human body and see the evolution of our genes over time. This planet really is full of extraordinary people working hard to find our link to the past and to understand the species we have today. Looking through the history of these important scientific discoveries and the link between the past and the present, you're able to really understand the impact history plays on scientific discovery. All of these topics have been things that you may have heard throughout your life, but to see a real link to the past is what really matters. The discovery made by the team at UCL allows scientists to look at the past for solutions that are needed today.